Hello, everybody. Scott Golden with the Pro Wrestling Logic YouTube channel. We return with our TNT Tuesday Night Titans review series. I'm enjoying doing the series because I'm enjoying watching the old stuff, but also our viewers and, well, listeners, as this is an audio program, are enjoying it as well, which is always a good thing to know and a good thing to realize, recognize, and acknowledge. Today's review is the 17th of July, 1984. Some notable things on here, which we'll get to in a second. If you're a new viewer, please like, subscribe, comment below what you like, what you don't like, and all that good stuff. Certainly want to encourage you to be interactive here. We are endeavoring to get to 1,000 subscribers as quickly as possible, so please share this on social media as well. In any event, so we start off with Wendy Richter joining the program. Of course, Wendy Richter, the protagonist of the female division in the rock and wrestling era through, well, 85 anyway. I don't know that she went into 86 for Vince. I think she pretty well petered out not too many months after WrestleMania over pay, and what I've heard over the years was some discrimination talk anyway. Also dealing with the fabulous Moolah, not one of her favorite things, as has been detailed other places. Don't need to do it here. For 1984, Wendy Richter, a very attractive lady. Certainly so much different, right? I mean, think about it, 94, 2004, 2014, 2024 will be 40 years ago, so we're talking about 36 years ago. What goes for dress, what goes for hairstyle, what goes for attractive, in men and women actually, at that time, always kind of catches me off guard, and I'm sure previous generations, if you haven't seen TNT, you're kind of scratching your head at some of the fashion choices. Wendy talks about being a liberated woman, talks about the women's rights movement that Cyndi Lauper is part of. That's a sentence I never thought I would say. Talks about going after Moolah this Monday in the Garden. So we're talking about the midpoint to late point in July of 1984 being a fabulous Moolah Wendy Richter affair. And, really kind of hypes it up. Says she left her cowboy boots in Texas, still liking that, but loving becoming an empowered woman thanks to the influence of Cyndi Lauper. Now, the Lauper thing runs through WrestleMania, so if you think about that, we've seen that develop over the last several months. Almost a year in development to the, maybe 10 months or so, to the Mania culmination of that angle. And I mean, imagine if they could do something for a year now. Imagine if they could do something for 6 months now. How different that would be. In any event, we move on to Vince McMahon and Alfred Hayes interviewing Tony Garea, by this point a 5-time tag team champion. I don't remember or recall him becoming a 6-time champion, although there's talk of him wanting to do so here. Talk of him leaving New Zealand, his homeland, in 1972, returning in 1978 to find out that his sons had children that were, oddly enough, 6 years older. He had to point this out multiple times. Don't quite understand why. Talks about, being a big deal in New Zealand. Talks about preferring to have a partner who's a little bit thinner. His most notable partner, for those that care, probably Rick Martel, of later the Model fame and Strikeforce fame. Tag team championship partner with Garea. We do see a match with Johnny Rodz in the middle. Johnny Rodz is not too much for him to handle. More of a mat-based contest than I remembered. Interesting to me that in the mid-'80s, well, actually early '80s and late '70s, he would have been a top-level babyface. I don't particularly see it here, but what can you do? Garea also says that he would have liked to have a match with Tito Santana. I'm actually somewhat intrigued by that thought, and might go searching into the deep dive of the interweb to see if such a match exists. If you know that one exists, could you post it below in the comment section? I'd like to see those two do battle, if it exists. All right, so we move on to a Jimmy Snuka matchup. Typical Snuka matchup here as Samoan number 3, otherwise known as Samu. Samu of the Head Shrinkers fame, later former one-time tag team champion, maybe twice. We see him do battle with Snuka. It's weird, but what sticks with me from this particular matchup is the facial expressions of Samu, who just is probably about 20, 21 years old at this point, and bitter as can be as a heel. I think guys and ladies who are part of the sport now could learn a lot from him. Very basic match, back and forth. Snuka takes a lot of punishment here, comes back with some chops, and finally the Snuka splash for the win. And once again, this is 1984. Jimmy Snuka is still on the rise, even though he's got that albatross of the murder hanging over his head. People love Snuka, probably the number 2 babyface in the area at the time. We go on to see Red Bastien join the show. For those unfamiliar, Bastien, predominantly a big deal in California, actually earlier than this, although they show a match, a Texas death match, which this segment is so poorly produced. Number 1, Red Bastien's watching the match, feigning that he doesn't remember the match or hasn't seen it before or whatever. Doesn't figure out that it is in Texas. He says somewhere in Texas until partway through the clip, and then puts over the Funk family, which I find odd, although Terry and Dory, Terry comes in first, Dory Jr. comes in second, probably about 6 months later or so, give or take. Terry in first in 1985. In any event, though, Red Bastien and Dory Funk, if you've never seen Dory Funk before, worth going out of your way to see this clip. Man, he knows how to throw a forearm. He knows how to make every move count. Even back into the late 70s, early 80s, he's a guy to watch. Of course, former NWA champion, so of course he would be. But if you've never seen Dory Jr. before, worth going out of your way to see. Then we see Greg Valentine come out, and I'm surprised by this. Greg always struck me as a guy who couldn't talk very well, but he carries himself well here, as we hear him talk about wanting matches to win the Intercontinental Championship, which he later does. Talks about wanting another opportunity at Hogan, which he eventually gets. They actually interview his wife, which I don't know if there was some thought of pairing her with him, or if she just happened to travel with him, or if, he'd flown her out because he was craving home. I don't know what the deal was that she got interviewed. Very attractive lady. And she basically plays the servant role a la Elizabeth during the segment, giving him a complete massage and throughout the interview process, and basically playing the very demure woman. Obviously, the segment doesn't age well, wouldn't do well today, but without a doubt, Valentine more well-spoken than I recall. Of course, my exposure to Valentine didn't begin until 89, although I did go back and watch a good bit of the 86 through 89 run, and then actually met Greg a couple of times in the early 2000s. And Greg's the type of guy, from my interactions with him, I'll be very honest, I still like the guy, but it depends what day you catch him on. If he feels like talking, if he is in a social mood and you know how to ask the right questions, he will impart information. If he is in any way near alcohol or other substances, or is having a bad day or had a bad flight, clear out, he will rip you a new tale. Greg is one of those very polarizing figures, and you have to know how to be around Greg to kind of get some semblance of interest. Had the joy and the luck to be around Tito Santana, probably Greg's most celebrated opponent, and one of the undercard feuds that I really, really enjoy. If you're not familiar with the year-plus feud they had from 84 through part of 85. So maybe we're talking October 84 through most of 85 or something like that. They had about a 16 to 18 month run over the Intercontinental title, and actually have a match here where Valentine gets a count-out victory. Very good match, worth going out of your way to watch, especially if you haven't seen these guys wrestle before. If you have, you know their caliber, but really, really interesting. Had the opportunity probably on about 4 to 6 occasions to interact with Tito Santana when I was in the Independents, and a completely different level of guy, really smart, really intelligent guy, and just very humble, still very down to earth, still loved wrestling. This was in the early to mid 2000s, and he was teaching at the time. I think he taught Spanish. I know he was a teacher. I don't remember for sure what he taught, but I'm pretty sure it was language or Spanish or something. But really humble guy, still enjoyed being a weekend warrior, still had good things to say about the sport, and was very permissive with giving information and critiques and all that. And what makes no sense to me, and I'm going to take a small aside to the independent wrestlers who are listening to this, and I know that there are because I've gotten DMs from some of you. If there is a legend who has done something more than you've done in the business and you don't pick their brain, you're just slow. You ride the short bus. I don't understand, but I routinely would sit in lobbies where Tito was signing autographs, or I'd sit in locker rooms where he was present, and man, like, guys would come up, they'd shake his hand, hey, I enjoy your work, and walk away, and not talk to him, and not pick his brain, and not ask him to watch matches. And I remember one specific time, during a summer outdoor show, he actually pulled me aside, because I was always the type, even though I didn't wrestle, I only did broadcasting, I would pick guys' brains. How do you do this? Why does this work? Why doesn't this work? It's just, I still do that today in the interviews that you hear on this channel. And he said, the saddest thing is, I've got this knowledge, but I'm not going to chase you down to give it to you. If you want it, you come find me. And, I mean, here's a guy who, by that point, been around, 20, 30 years, and just like, I'll tell you, but you gotta ask. And he lamented how people didn't ask. Anyway, then we move on to the second part of the Valentine interview, which I talked about before. Worth going out of your way to see if you want to see a different side of Greg Valentine, if you haven't seen that side of Greg before. Then we move on to the beginning of one of my favorite, what ends up being one of my favorite TNT segments. The beginning of it is nondescript. Roddy Piper joins the show. Many people say Piper's one of the best heels of all time. Piper was a guy I didn't really get into until later in his career, although one of my favorite undercard matches is his match with the Mountie in 1992. It's comedy done right. I enjoyed it. It's fun. I also like his match with Bret Hart at WrestleMania 8, like that whole story arc. Anyway, Roddy Piper later became one of my cult favorites because of his interviews. This, if you have not seen it, is one of those things, if you're a wrestler, go watch it to see how to get mileage out of something simple. If you're a fan, go watch it just to see how to enjoy the art of a promo. If you're living under a rock, go watch it because it'll give you the strength to leave the rock. So basically he's out there and he's talking about how he's built himself from nothing, and no one really respects him. He kind of mocks Al Hayes as somebody that he beat when he was 17 years old. Legit, Piper breaks in somewhere between 15 and 18 years old, depending on which source you believe. And anyway, Piper claims to be a street kid and pulls himself up by his bootstraps. For those that have heard the story, some believe it, some don't. I never met Roddy, can't comment either way on it. But anyway, so we watch a segment, we watch a bit of a segment of the Piper's Pit where Snuka and the Coconut and the whole thing, which that's probably one of the most iconic interview segments in the history of the sport. If you think about it, I think even non-wrestling fans know about Roddy Piper and the Coconut. Anyway, we come back, and there's an exchange, and the whole while, Al Hayes is he's lambasting Piper about being a bad guy and being arrogant and just not wanting to shake his hand, the whole thing. And I can't remember the exact quote, but something ticks Piper off, and Piper just calls off and slaps Al Hayes so hard, Hayes falls over and crumples. And number one, the first time I ever saw it, I literally jumped out of my skin. It was that believable. And I mean, I was in my early 20s at that point. I legitimately thought something had happened to the point where they shot on each other. And, you know, McMahon goes nuts. He's getting Piper out of there. He's just going crazy. And Al Hayes comes back and basically says Piper needs to be dealt with and all this stuff. If you watch one segment from the 1984 TNT series, go out of your way to check out the Roddy Piper slapping Al Hayes segment. It's on this episode. Let me go back and check the date just because I don't have it right in front of me. It is on the July 17th, 1984 episode. Man, it is money. It is money. And definitely would love to hear your comments about that. Then they go into a recap of a highlight package for Moolah and Penny Mitchell. Obviously hyping up Moolah and Wendy Richter earlier in the program, wanting to get Moolah on. Anyway, that's this segment. But again, probably easily in my top 5, maybe my top all-time favorite segment from TNT. We'll see as we go through. But man, definitely worth watching. The Valentine stuff is fun too. In any event, I remind you, keep your feet on the ground. Your head in the moment. Until next time, everybody.